Coming to you live from Radio Cayman Studio.
For the record.
For the record. Hear from your government officials, independents, and the opposition on issues that matter to you. The record. Engage in an open dialogue between residents and lawmakers.
For the record.
The record. Informative, impartial, insightful.
This is your talk show.
1-800-534-8255. Your calls, your input. This is For the Record. And now, your host, Orit Connor.
Good morning and welcome to For the Record. Today is Monday, the 9th day of October 2017. I trust that everyone who's listening or watching, that you had a great weekend. I know for some, Sunday was a traumatic day. We had another fatality on our roads, and I first would like to say, to convey our condolences to the family of the deceased individual. It is not an easy situation when you lose a loved one and when that loss comes so unexpectedly as well. I want to thank you, our listening and viewing audience, for allowing Radio Cayman, and by extension For the Record, into your homes, into your vehicles as you traverse the busy roads of the Cayman Islands, into your places of work, whether it be an office cubicle or if you're working in the outdoors. Of course, For the Record is a show produced by the staff and management of Radio Cayman, and it is geared towards keeping you abreast of issues as they arise and play out on the local, regional, and international scene. I am your host, Orit Connor. My co-hosts, Dr. Steve McBeal, Ms. Theresa Pitcairn. You can join us every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 7:30 a.m. until 9:30 a.m. Our phone lines are always open. There is always someone there waiting to take your calls. The next few weeks, it will be the voice of Mr. Paul Akai. You can call us on our toll-free number provided courtesy of Flo. That toll-free number is 1-800-534-8255. You can also call us on 949-8037 and the 949-6990. Of course, if you don't like to talk on the telephone, then email us at For the Record. That is one word, For the Record, at CANDW.KY. Without any further ado, I want to introduce to you my two co-hosts this morning, Ms. Theresa Pitcairn. Ms. Theresa, good morning. Welcome to For the Record again. Hope you had a great weekend.
I did, thanks. Good morning, OC. Good morning, Steve. Good morning to the wider audience. I'd also like to say this morning that sorry guys, seems to be something.
It's okay. Go ahead talking until the call comes through.
Yeah, right. I wanted to say thank you very much for having me this morning, and a shout out to Miss Rosa and her family. I attended I'm not necessarily one that is keen on funerals because I lost my mom some years ago. Mm-hmm. But yesterday was a reflection of someone who represents us as women in Cayman. She was so forthright, she was so articulate, loving, caring, giving, and kind. And we had a blessed send-off for her yesterday. And so I'd like to extend heartfelt condolences to all the members of Rosa and her family.
Okay. Dr. Steve, morning. Hope you had a good weekend.
Yeah, good morning, Mr. For the Record, and good morning to Theresa, and good morning to all your For the Record listeners in locally and abroad. I had a great weekend yesterday. I stayed home all the weekend, and I would like to give my condolence to the Solomon Webster family. I missed the funeral. I think there was some sort of a mix-up because some of the family told me it was going to be on Saturday. And my sister called me yesterday and told me it was yesterday, and I had no idea because, and then they told me it was going to be in the Seventh-day Adventist Church in Georgetown, and then I heard that it was up actually in the Seventh-day Adventist Church in Savannah. Mm-hmm. Rosa was more than a friend to us. Rosa was like a sister to myself and my family. I think when she came down to Georgetown for the first time in the 1950s, she stayed at our house.
Okay.
And she was like a sister to my sister. And to me, she was like a brother. And I was so distraught yet when my sister called me. In fact, I called my sister and asked her, when is the Rosa Webster funeral? And my sister said, I'm just coming from Kendrick's house now, and the funeral was today, and so I would like to apologize for the family for missing that event. Well, today is a very special day here. There's the compass is in it again. Mm-hmm. The compass is now trying to apologize to Gloria McField Nixon for the story that they published and on last week. And it seems to me that the more that they apologize is the more that I look at the story, it's the more harmful the story has been. And the problem with the story is that I cannot understand, OC and Teresa, why is it that a story is written, it's going to press, and someone who has nothing to do with the story, who has never researched the story, who never followed the story, who never wrote the story, go in and change the story to make it a completely different story. That really is something that bothers me with the story, because I could see if the writer had gotten the story wrong, mm-hmm. but the story was right all along, and somebody went behind the writer's back, unknown to the editor, unknown to all of them, and completely changed the story to make it look like the person who was arrested and who was Gloria McField Nixon.
And that fact brought out in their explanation? Because I haven't had an opportunity to read.
That is brought out in their explanation.
Okay.
And it goes on to say how they work very hard to put out the paper. They recall the paper, and they work very hard to put out the excerpts in the paper and the extras in the paper, and so forth and so forth and so forth. And it seems to me that this should not go unpunished. Mm-hmm. And it's not for a newspaper who calls out the government and everybody else whenever they get a chance. And it seems to me that I would, if that had been me, they would never get away with just publishing an apology.
Mm-hmm. Because the potential damage is there for a person who acts in the highest civil service position in the Cayman Islands, has acted as deputy governor.
That's right.
That can have repercussions. There is a possibility that at some point in time she could hold the substantive post of deputy governor.
Of governor,
or could have the opportunity to do so, and no one knows the damage. Well, I just want to say that if at the end of the day she decides to pursue it and to seek damages, monetary damages, in the event, I don't think that there's anything in the public service and management law that if she were to obtain compensation, monetary compensation, that she can't keep that for herself. But in the event she doesn't want to keep it for herself, I know several worthy charities that she could give a six-figure she could share a six-figure settlement with in the event that she chooses to do that. But see, again, my opinion is that the Compass has done irreparable damage again to whatever reputation that they had, because there are so many people out there who have expressed feelings that the Compass is anti-Caymanian. There are so many people who feel that there is a conflict of interest. There are conflicting interests when reporters who have applications in for permanent residence in the Cayman Islands are the same reporters who are reporting on the permanent residence application cases, and the editorials are bringing the boards, the status and permanent residence boards are holding them to account. You know, quite a conflict of interest. My question also has to do with, and I guess it becomes really a non-question after what Dr. Macfield has said in relation to the changing of the story, is that who edits in the newspaper business? Do you have someone who looks over a story before it actually goes to print to verify it? Do you have someone with some legal expertise to ensure that what is being printed there is not defamatory in any way?
Apparently. Just let me say this is what the paper wrote, okay? It says, Brent Fuller originally wrote, according to government senior human resources official, Gloria McField Nixon, the employee of the government, served prior to her arrest on the August 16th. The editor changed the copy so that it read, according to the government senior human resources official, Gloria McField left government service before her arrest in August 16th. And the second material change was this. Brent Fuller wrote, the suspect has been released on police bail for the time being, police said. And the editor changed it and says, the editor changed the copy so that it read, Mrs. McField has been released on police bail, police said. Can you tell?
That is more than egregious.
Huh?
So, yeah, in a previous article, because first of all, I wanted to speak to it to the extent that I know Gloria personally, and I was a little offended when I thought at first that there was an attempt to besmirch her reputation, knowing that the media outlets articles is actually disseminated globally, so that has that global impact when you see something like that, especially as Cayman has this reputation of being on the blacklist and have this reputation for corruptness, right? So I had issues with that, but then I saw the apology and I understood what transpired. But then again, when I reviewed the apology, I recalled reviewing an editorial months ago when a politician's son was alleged to have imported certain animals and the disclosing of those names. And I recall specifically some of the what was said by the media at the time. So I retrieved a copy of that last night, and I have a copy here on my phone, and it says, the Compass says, and they said a whole bunch of stuff in this particular editorial. In the future, expect the Compass to depart from that tradition whenever it is in the public interest. Expect more names to appear in this newspaper, not fewer, but we will never do so without extensive deliberation and, when necessary, before taking competent legal advice. Now, this is what the Compass says that they do systematically before they disclose.
Extensive deliberation.
That's
as lawyers, would something like that could be used in a court of law to say, here they gave a commitment, this is what they say that they do, they failed to do it here.
Yes, they fail to carry out that responsibility to the public, and you know, under the English law, you publish and be damned. That's what we say in law. You publish and be damned.
Can you break that down for us? Very quickly before we go to the break.
You can publish, and you can publish anything as long as it's true, and as long as it's not defamatory. But once you publish something that's defamatory, you'll be damned for it.
Okay. Folks, I want to remind you that you're listening to For the Record. I'm your host, Dorrit Connor. My two co-hosts in the studio with me this morning, Ms. Teresa Pitker and Dr. Steve Macfield. When we return, lots more to talk about, so please stay tuned. For the Record, we'll be back shortly. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. In the studio with me, Ms. Teresa Pitker and Dr. Steve Macfield. We're going to continue to talk about this Cayman Compass story until the 8 o'clock news, more than likely. Ms. Teresa has, a lot more that she wants to add to it, which is factual stuff. She's going to be reading from other publications as well that have commented on this particular situation.
Right, and I hope what we say this morning is taken in the spirit in which it is shared. And I can only speak to the reason why I took a personal interest. And like I said, I know Gloria very well, and I have a I hold her in the highest regard. And it seems to be the case that that's how the Compass see her as well, based on the apology this morning. But, you know, the reason why I think it's taken on such a national agenda is because of the way in which many people, not just Caymanians, feel that the Compass takes a certain view about certain things, in as much as they have said in their editorial that they try to take a balanced and a measured position. When you read through the blogs, for example, and I think I may have sent you some copies of some of the comments that were made, people take the view that and I don't know if this is necessarily true, this is an observation of commentary from blogs that I've seen, that, you know, the Compass has its own agenda, and it's in the business of naming and shaming Caymanians to the detriment of the Caymanian community. I don't know if that is necessarily true. And also, when they seek to tell us who we must employ and how the process of employment should be, I took a great offense to that, because when I lived in the United Kingdom and Canada, I had no voice to tell the Canadian people and the Canadian government what their employment practices as biz. When you're in Rome, you do as the Romans do. So I say all of that to say that if we did not necessarily have this historic view of the Compass and its effect, I perhaps would have taken a different view. And I put that also in the context of what we've seen last week with that YouTube commentary as well. And, you know, people flagrantly behaving in a manner which suggests that, you know, Caymanians, again, have no value. This naming and shaming down Caymanians, it seems to be something that people hold to be their truth in terms of their response to the Compass. In my mind, the press has a responsibility to always publish things accurately, and that seems to be what I believe the Compass will try to do. But when they take it to a different level, where people who are natives and people who live here and enjoy living here take the view that this is not something that is necessarily balanced or measured, it comes across as something that is definitely anti-Caymanian and anti-things that's good for Caymanians. I don't know if that's the case, but when you review the blogs, there's a significant commentary about that. Even on Facebook as well, people went, you know, it was just lit up with the way in which people responded to this. And the way in which this is disseminated into the public internationally, and again in the context that it has with Cayman already having its own issues to deal with on an international stage. And that was the context in which I viewed this whole thing. Again, we need to have a national conversation about how we want the community to evolve, OC and Steve. How are we going to get to a place where we don't have to second guess whether or not what is being disseminated in the press is fake news? In fact, when I left here on Friday, people were calling me about it, and I just said, that is what Trump calls fake news. That ain't true. You know, and I didn't even give it a second view. But then 4, 5, 6 people started to call me when they saw me. Did you? And I says, no, don't believe that stuff, Gloria. If you said maybe X, Y, and Z, no, not Gloria. So for me, that wasn't even a story. People also said, you know, the fact that you saw Macfield and Nixon, and I mean, this may not even necessarily have come to the Compass's mind as an organization, but people took the view that the fact that they saw those two names, you know, it suggested that, you know, there was this salacious response to it being Caymanian and another opportunity to dumb us down. I don't know, but that view we need to work on, because Cayman is too small, and we see the sensitive nature of when things are out there, how Caymanians will respond. And we got to do what's right for everyone.
Dr. Macfield?
I agree with that. And this brings. I agree with that, and this brings me to the point that I have always said: we really have to have a national newspaper that is separate from the Compass, something that can respond and represents the thoughts and the aspirations and the policy of the people, the policies of the government and the people. We don't have that kind of newspaper in the Cayman Islands, unfortunately. And although the Times and then now the defunct Reporter try their best, but usually the news is secondhand news, and not first-hand news. And so we need to have Caymanian people have to get together. There are enough Caymanian people intelligent enough and who are good writers that they can get together. And I would throw this out to them. Come together and form their own newspaper and put out their own news about themselves. The Compass is not interested in our history, our culture, and our growth, and where we are going to go tomorrow or the next year or the next 50 years from now. They're not interested in that. And so it didn't surprise me when the story came out, especially if it's a McPhail or a Nixon. Right away, that made the story. The names
Prominent
were
Georgetown
yes,
names.
the names were the ones that made the story. It's not what happened in the story. It was the names that made the story. And so I am saying if it had been me, I would have the lawsuit ready already from Sunday to file today. And to put in their hands, because this cannot continue to go on. Because if it continues to go on, there is going to be two separate societies that are distinct and separate, and that is not good for a small community.
Okay. Now you spoke about ownership of newspapers and Caymanians getting together, and I tell you, our listeners are really extremely sharp. This actually came in on Friday, but I was unable at that time to read it. Says, good morning again. I hear complaints about jobs every day. My question is, where are the Caymanian entrepreneurs such as Clive Webster, Bigger Ranking, Norberg Thompson, Captain Theo, Graham Thompson? I recall the farm soldier. That is the way for people to build a country by ownership and enterprise, not by FDI that sells the future for trinkets today. That writer also, I think we had mentioned something about ice cream on
yes.
Friday, and he said that
yes.
That writer also says, he says, morning, I see a local brand in the supermarket. By the way, it is excellent. So it seems to be a local brand of ice cream out there. We'll try have to find out who that what that brand is, as well. So that concludes our discussion this morning on the Compass
before you
situation.
Go,
Paul, do you have a minute still? Yeah, we have 1 minute.
Before you go, perhaps we ought to bring back the Voice again. We have to bring back the Voice again, because I remember when the Voice was very prominent in the glass house in the morning on Friday mornings when it came out. It was printed between Thursday and Wednesday and Thursday night, and distributed before daylight on Friday morning. And when it came out on Friday morning, you could hardly found any civil servants at their desk, because everybody was in the toilet reading the Voice of you, the voice of me, the voice of the voice of us to set Cayman free, and of course, the writers and the producer of the Voice were hounded. Because they didn't know who was publishing the Voice. It was being published in a different place every weekend.
Wow.
And the elite then, who was against the Voice, had police searching the homes and places and out in the streets looking to see what cars were moving at around 11 and 12 o'clock in the night. But of course, the producers and the writers in the Voice had already met, and all they did was distribute the paper early in the morning. And so we probably have to bring back the Voice again.
Folks, I want to remind you that you're listening to For the Record. I'm your host, Stuart Connor. My two co-hosts, Mr. Risa Pitcairn, Dr. Steve McPhail. When we return, remember, on Friday, one of our listeners called in and wanted us to talk about the formation of government, the seats, talk about the Senate, what it means. We're going to do that, but we're going to start off, because we've been holding off on this story for quite a while. We want to talk about the constitutional discussions and the use of the word parliament in our constitution. We will kick that off, and that will flow right into to the whole issue of a bicameral legislature as well. Please stay tuned for the record. We'll be back immediately after the 8 o'clock news. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. In the studio with me, my two co-hosts, Ms. Teresa Pitker and Dr. Steve McFeel. As I mentioned before we went to the news, one of our listeners, callers, wanted us to talk about legislature, the whole idea of a Senate, and, to explain the workings and how they're established in other jurisdictions, and it varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. Before we go there, though, we're going to preface that whole discussion by talking about the constitutional talks and the whole issue of the use of the word parliament to describe our legislature. You have heard members of our legislative assembly, even here on For the Record, mention or refer to our legislature as parliament, and you have heard Dr. Steve McFeel and even I to a certain extent, but more so Dr. McFeel, caution them about the use of the word parliament. Wanted to hold off on this until MLA Mr. Arden McLean was in the studio with us, but it may be a few weeks before he returns to the studio because the official opposition, they have set a schedule for each of their members to come in on a particular Friday. So I think in the rotation, he would not be the one who's up next. And we don't want to hold off on this too long. Not to say that we won't return to this issue when Mr. McLean is on there. And the reason for that is because he was part and parcel of the constitutional discussions in 2008, 2009, when these discussions took place. So on the Wednesday, the 14th of January, 2009, the chairman of the constitutional discussions, Mr. Ian Henry, says, anyway, can we then move to, having put that one firmly on the outstanding points list, which I perfectly well anticipated, can we try and rattle through as much as Part 4? Well, all of Part 4, beginning with Section 59, where the outstanding point here is the name of the Legislative Assembly. And I wondered whether you were happy, with retaining the historic name of the Legislative Assembly, or continue to want to make a leap into the future, calling it a parliament. So Mr. Henry first wanted to know whether or not we wanted to retain the historic name, or whether or not we want to leap into a future by calling it a parliament. Now, I don't know what he meant by wanting to leap into the future, whether or not by calling it a parliament that it took us to any higher constitutional ground or not. But at the same time, he talks about the historic name. So you get two implications from it. One that it is only a name, and number two, that if we're leaping into the future, that we're going, outside of our comfort zone to a certain extent.
I think what he meant by that was that if you're going to leap into the future, then you have to have two chambers. And because a parliament usually is a house with two chambers.
Okay.
Upper house and a lower house.
Got you. And I'm sure that based on your research that you have done on the weekend, you've been able to. Yes. Now, I'd like one of you to read what the Honorable McKeever Bush said at that point in time as well. Who wants to read that?
I'll read, McKeever. You read.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I wouldn't. We have not changed our views on this matter. because we cannot be called a parliament. And I just don't
sorry. My mistake. It was the Honourable Alden McLaughlin Jr. first, sorry, and then Mr. McKeever.
Teresa?
Honourable.
No, I have the wrong one. Sorry. Just go ahead.
Page 214.
This one?
214.
Okay.
Got it? Okay.
Yeah.
Honourable Alden McLaughlin.
Okay. Well, sir, I don't think the government's view on this has changed. We are seeking to mark this significant advancement in terms of our constitutional status and standing by also a change of name to the LA. And I think that it is still our view. The point has never been a deal breaker with us, and I think we'd be interested to hear whether on reflection the opposition feel that the move to Parliament is something that they would support.
And then the Honourable W. McKeever Bush.
And then, Mr. Chairman, I wouldn't, and we have not changed our views on this matter because we cannot be called a parliament. And I just don't think we can set it down in our constitutional documents so much because we are not. We are not a parliament. We are a representative body. And I know that there are views around the country where people feel that we must get away and more away. And I am concerned, as I think the public would be, about this constitution pushing us further away than we want to be. But that is another story. This matter, no, I am not going to support that because we are not. We are not a parliament. Parliament, the whole parliament, the Parliament of the UK, we are not an independent country. And that's the only, a parliament would be a sovereign body, and we are not a sovereign body. We are a representative body. That's what we are.
And then there was a little back and forth, not much. Mr. Kurt Tibbetts, Honourable Kurt Tibbetts, said Mr. Chair, and then the Honourable W. McKeever Bush said so, and then the Honourable Kurt Tibbetts says, we have a park in here that we parked one issue up until now. Let's park this one and see where we end up on everything else, okay? So they basically parked the whole situation, the discussion, any decision in relation to whether or not we would call our legislature a parliament. Now, and folks, you may have heard some hesitation, and we were reading exactly verbatim from the transcripts. So we were saying things exactly the way that they appear on the transcripts as well. So Dr. McPhail and Ms. Teresa, in relation to Parliament, a legislature, a bicameral legislature, Senate, let's talk about that. And I know you did your homework, so you'll be graded now by our audience.
I did some stuff here, and pardon me because it's my own handwriting. I didn't get a chance to type it up.
Not a problem.
Okay. In a parliamentary system that has an upper and a lower house or two chambers is historically called a bicameral legislature. One of those houses or chambers is sometimes called a Senate. A Senate is a bicameral legislature. As in a bicameral legislature, it's the upper house, and it is usually smaller in its numbers of members to the members of the lower house, sometimes described as the House of Commons or the House of Representatives. A legislature that is composed of only one house, such as the Cayman legislature, that is defined as by Section 59 of the 2009 Constitution on order, has neither an upper house nor a lower house, and is a unicameral legislature. Some parliamentary systems with an upper house or Senate are the following: Canada, Australia, Jamaica, Bermuda, and this is not exhaustive. The United Kingdom parliamentary system is a two-chamber bicameral legislature. However, its upper house is not called a Senate. It is styled as the House of Lords. The lower chamber is the House of Commons. Representation in the House of Lords is passed primarily on a combination of family hereditary hereditary pairs, and the United Kingdom's government appoints others known as life pairs. The House of Lords functions as both a legislature and a judicial capacity. That is, it considers legislation passed by the Commons as well as serving as a final court in civil and criminal cases. The House of Lords legislative powers are limited to a 1 year's suspensive veto only. That suspensive veto does not extend to money bills. In Canada, Australia, Jamaica, and Bermuda, the Senates are elected legislative bodies. That means that senators are appointed to their offices instead of being elected by the people. The upper house of the Canadian Parliament has 105 senators who hold their seats until they are age 75 years. As of 2016, there were 40 Conservatives, 37 Independents, and 30 Independents, and I can't remember the others. The senators in Jamaica are appointed by the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition. The Prime Minister approves 13 senators, and the Leader of the Opposition approves 8 senators. In the Jamaica House of Representatives, with a 60-member chamber, the Senate functions as a review chamber, considers past bills by the House, and it can initiate its own legislation except money bills, and it cannot delay money bills for more than 30 days. The Senate in Bermuda is the upper house, and the Bermuda Senate consists of 11 members appointed by the government. By the governor. 5 senators are appointed on the advice of the premier. 3 senators are appointed on the advice of the Leader of the Opposition, and 3 senators are appointed on the discretion of the governor. The Bermuda Senate serves as a roadblock to constitutional changes, as there is a requirement of a 2/3 majority. This is called in Bermuda a supermajority for a constitutional amendment to pass. Of the 3 appointed senators by the governor, one is elected as president of the Senate, and the other one is elected as the vice president, as the deputy president. In Bermuda, the parliament grew out of what happened in 1820 to a bicameral house in 1888. Then in 1968, as a result of the civil rights movement, a new constitution was advanced, and a form of government replaced the old electoral system limited to male-dominated only. The Westminster Parliament Senate system differs from the presidential legislative system, such as the United States of America. The Senate in America is an elected chamber, and there are 2 senators. There are 2 senators elected for each state. The American Senate has a control over the president's cabinet and the administration generally throughout its prerogative of confirmation. Because of its prerogative of confirmation and nomination of offices, including the Supreme Court. The American Senate can also veto legislation passed by the lower house or Congress, and the American Senate can also block budget measures passed by the Congress, and additionally, a president must have the consent of both houses, that is, the Congress and the Senate, to stay in office. A legitimate criticism of the appointment of members of an upper house is the weakness of the system of political patronage. Too often friends and allies of a prime minister or opposition leader are appointed as senators for their donations and support to the political parties. Whilst I believe in an upper house or Senate, I believe that there should be no constitutional barriers to making Senate appointments more democratic. Between 1831 and 1865, the Cayman Islands legislative legislature was bicameral one. The lower house was styled the House of Representatives, and the upper house the House of the magistrates. And both chambers were initially elected on the first election on the 10th of December 1831. Representatives were elected to the lower house were 10, and the upper house magistrates were 8. But bills passed by the vestry or the lower house had to be also passed by the magistrates in the upper house to become law. By the end of the vestry and magistrates legislative system on the 3rd of July 1959, the vestry had some 47 members of magistrates and representatives. Today, the Cayman Islands legislature is composed of Her Majesty the Queen, 19 elected members, 2 ex-official members, and a speaker. The MLAs that are the majority party or the group forms the government and are appointed to cabinet positions by their leader. The premier, the other party members or group with the next highest member of elected MLAs form the opposition and are appointed. Some of them are appointed as shadow ministers to mirror the government's cabinet ministers. Mm-hmm. Unlike the Senate system, bills are initiated in the Cayman Islands in the legislature. No bills will become law unless it is passed by a majority of the MLAs present in the legislature. The Legislative Assembly has control over the government's budget finances and money cannot be spent nor taxes levied unless it gets the approval of the Legislative Assembly. Members of a Senate may also be appointed as ministers in a government cabinet. That prerogative, according to many constitutional scholars, defeats the democratic system of representation because appointed senators are not elected by a vote of the people.
Okay, I'm going to ask you to pause there for me, Dr. Macfield. We have to take a commercial break, yes, and we have 2 callers as well. Folks, please stay tuned. For the record, we'll be back shortly. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. We're going straight to the phone lines as promised. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Good morning to you, 3 Musketeers.
Morning, sir.
Albert. People are so super intelligent. A lesson there in civics, Dr. McField. Thank you very much for that.
Yes.
I just thought that the magistrate in that old Peter Rebel government, that at the time of the first elections, that they were appointed by the British governors in Jamaica.
No, they were not.
Because I know he appointed 2 more in 1831. Mm-hmm. That letter that was written to him October the 26th, before the decision to do the elections, that he had appointed 1 or 2 more because one had died, and Mr. Hunter had died, I believe. But listen on that. What I'd like to say about the terrible thing with Mr. Gloria McField Nixon, mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. that has been wonderful lady. Mm-hmm. I was very disturbed when I saw that. I know the 50 papers that got out away and was already in the hands of people. I imagine they'll be worth something someday, but not to make light of it. But I do wonder. I went through, read quite a bit of it last night. I managed to get a paper. The redone thing that it's all out now. And there seems to be a very strenuous, rigorous way of, before they publish how many editors check this, how many editors check that, and going over it as Dr. McFee was talking about and Mr. Easter. But at the last minute, is that what they call a ghost writer, stepped in, unnamed, and has now been terminated. They assured us that. I just wonder who that person was. If it was a Caymanian or who the person was. It seems so very convenient to find that person at the last minute who inserted this, and that was what came out in print and not again. And then very, very conveniently, that person no longer exists. so to speak. There's something very, very, I'm going to say my opinion. This is my opinion, mine only.
Mm-hmm.
There's something slightly wrong with this whole thing. Thank you very much. I'll listen on.
Thank you very much, caller. Thank you very much for that. We're going to ask Dr. McField to continue, and then we're going to parse what he has to say into everyday parlance as well, in terms of what goes on and and everything else.
I would just like to say that Australia has every state in Australia has 12 senators, and the mainland territories has 2 senators. Their powers are similar to the senators in Canada. And I say, although a Senate is a core component of the Westminster legislative system and plays a role in the interests of the state, of the state and the stakeholders in our Constitution, the constitutional design, there is no interest in this country for constitutional negotiations or reform to achieve a Senate here. Although a Senate cannot vote a motion of no confidence against the government, it can act as a check and balance, because even where there is no veto, a Senate may defeat legislation and its opposition may foster a lower house to reconsider or even abandon controversial legislation. However, by conventions, an upper house or Senate should not obstruct the business of an elected government for frivolous and partisan reasons. Should the Cayman Islands legislative system move to become a bicameral house, the answer to that question is clearly with a political educated electorate. Members of the legislative system who understands the workings of the Westminster parliamentary system and are not intimidated or afraid to push for a constitutional arrangement that ensures deeper functions of democratic institutions. The founding fathers of our democratic system in 1831 did just that. 187 years later, with all the so-called wealth, development, and technology, we cannot even emulate what those brave great men of guts and grit did in 1831. Yet we brag about our superior foundation and opulence. One often asks the question, who are the political dinosaurs? And the men and the and who are the political dinosaurs? Are they the men and women of yesterday? The 1959 and the 1972 constitutions did well. They marred the way for us to pave the way. They even crafted legislation to protect us and our interests. Today that is all gone, dashed away for more development, increased population, and an unbridled desire for control by an elite group. One further wonders whether we have not yet come to grips that we have lost control of control and that more is not better than enough.
Mm-hmm. Now, Ms. T, I know you did similar research and basically came up with some of the same, but I want you to fine-tune some of what Dr. Steve has said in terms of what your research has revealed to us as well.
Right, and I think overall Steve tried to give us a quick snapshot of what it looks like, and I looked at senates in the Commonwealth Caribbean because of the English background and so on, but as Dr. McField says, the Bermuda system, for example, was based on what you had in the UK, the Westminster model. But it was clear that they understood that it wasn't necessarily a parliament; it was a legislative body. But they used the same languages to describe the different bodies. The other thing, the concern I have, and I'll make two comments, is that with the structure of the Senate in Bermuda, for example, you have 11 people, and it's the governor that normally appoints those 11 people. And of those 11 people, 5 are actually nominated from the party in power, the premier, 3 from the opposition, and another 3 that are ostensibly independent. And they actually choose who's going to be the leader and who's going to be the deputy leader. What you can have is the situation that emerged with Dunkley, as we were talking about during the break, where, you know, you may have... And the other thing, too, is that because they are not politically appointed, people often say that it's not... That body doesn't necessarily have the kind of role that it ought to have, because it will usually represent the interest of the reigning political party.
Now, when you say not politically appointed, what do you mean? Because
not elected.
Not elected.
Oh,
yeah,
okay,
at the polls.
Sorry. Okay.
And the other thing is, too, you don't have a body that is representative of each community. For example, Bordentown, East End, in our particular situation, or with the one man, one vote, the different areas. So, one, it's not reflective in terms of the democratic process. People go to the polls and elect the other person. And because they're more loyal to party as opposed to loyal to the national interest. That's also been one of the concerns that people have had about the role of senates. So, as I was saying during the break, we need to think about, if we're going to go that way, something creative and something that makes sense for our community, knowing the kind of criticism that's normally leveled at senates and so on. Steve was pointing out the importance of having qualified persons on board who understand politics, who understand the legislative process, and who can actually make decisions about what is relevant and can make it in an informed way. Politics, as we know, is when we choose our politicians, it's not necessarily based on competences, it's more based on relationships. So that sometimes can cause some problems or cause challenges, as we've seen from time to time. But when you're choosing a Senate, you want to ensure that those persons are competent and can actually deliver on a professional level.
What about putting political... Well, we've seen situations where persons who have been unsuccessful in an election being put into the Senate. What about putting political hopefuls there so that you give them a taste of the legislative process, and at the same time, when you bring them forward as a candidate, you can also promote the fact that they have been involved in the legislative process as well. So it's like a staging ground for a politician.
For that, I'd invite us to think about evolving. We have to make sure that the competences are there and get away from the kind of criticisms leveled at folks that we elect, and the kind of, the negative stuff that people say that we elect and people don't have the relevant competences and so on. And I'm not saying that you have, by competences, I'm not saying that you need to have a university degree. I'm just saying that you must have capable people who can actually think about things, think it through, and can have independent thought, independent creative thought. So that's one thing. And the other thing that I would recommend is to ensure that when we're going to choose those folks, we also have some form of political theory, or people should be in a position where they can articulate issues on a global scale and on a local scale. And that will require some training. And I'm not sure if the Senate is the place where they will obtain that training, or if if we are evolving to a place where we want to behave and to be seen to be professionals, that we make sure that those in the Senate have the relevant qualifications, who can represent us on any international stage, and we have that faith in them doing just that.
Now, I know one of our prominent politicians here in the Cayman Islands, their argument has been that there are many persons who are quite capable of contributing to governance to a certain extent, or to the legislative process, but are not prepared to go out there on the campaign trail and seek to get an elected position, and that those persons could then be accommodated in terms of being appointed to a Senate where they can serve some purpose, especially in instances where if your constitution allows for a person who is appointed to the Senate to then be able to be chosen as a minister or a junior minister or whatever. There are those who would argue and counter that by saying, if you want to represent the people, you get out there and you pound the pavement like everybody else and take your licks like everybody else. The Senate shouldn't be a place where you should be shielded, from the political battles.
Yeah, that comes with the political bruising, and that gives you the kind of maturity that you ought to have. And I think that that's really important, OC, because I find that our leaders tend to be thin-skinned, and they don't respond favorably to objective criticism. I think that that's something that we have to go through as well, and I'll just pass it on to Steve to have some.
Well, I think that's one of the criticism from constitutional scholars about a Senate, an appointed Senate, is that a person who really could not get elected and a party hack, or a person who supports a party politically and financially, could be appointed to the Senate and then could come to get into the legislature, get into the cabinet as a minister via the Senate. And I think that is one of the great criticisms that I have seen leveled by some of the most prominent constitutional scholars. And so they favor the American system, Senate system, more than the appointed system, because the American system is by election. Each state has the right to elect 2 senators, and so only the best will come to the top, and by an election. And you see, that body is very powerful. The elected Senate of the United States, although it's only 100 and something senators, to something like
100 senators,
100 senators, so something like 400 or 500 people in the Congress. And the Senate actually controls the government. It controls the president. It controls the president cabinet. And by the way, the vice president of the United States is also president of the Senate, and has a casting vote if there's a tie.
Question, why do they refer to it as the upper and lower house? Does it has anything to do with the influence, or why is it referred to? Do you come across the reason for, in some cases, calling it the upper and the lower house?
I think it has the old historical symbolism that the House of Commons was the elected house of the ordinary people, and the upper house was the house of the aristocrats, the payers, the merchant class, and then you had to send a legislation up there to them to get their acquiescence, and so that's how that evolved to upper house and lower house.
I'm going to diverge a little bit, because by now, I think our viewers and our listeners would have realized the deafening silence of the government when it comes to being on For the Record. The last person on here was Minister of Finance. We also had Minister Rivers on here. We have never had anyone else, including we have never had any of the counselors on here as well. I am getting varying reasons as to why. Some people are saying because the show is too critical of the government. Well, if that is the case, too bad. I say that to say that I believe our Premier would have returned now from his trip to the UK and to the continent as well. I am sure that the government will advise the Caymanian public as to what has taken place, at least those issues that can be publicly spoken about. Whether or not the government chooses to do that via a press conference, a press briefing, whether or not they choose to take their place at the table here For the Record as well, Be that as it may, they can choose to do it either way. But I also want to place this marker out there and a reminder that while the premier, while a minister, while a councillor may represent their particular constituent, the premier is a premier of all of the people of the Cayman Islands and needs to speak to all of the people of the Cayman Islands. A minister is a minister of all of the people of the Cayman Islands and need to do the same. Councillors are also councillors of all the people and need to get out there and talk to people, not just simply in your constituencies by having constituency meetings or by having photo ops in various places where you're replacing the minister, but in other situations as well. And very quickly to say that those councillors who are not necessarily members of the political party, the ruling political party, need, whether or not they're handcuffed by the party or the party executive, that they are not allowed to get out there and speak on their own as an independent candidate. I don't know if that situation, if they're bound by that or not. I just put that on the record as well. We're going to take a break for our 9 o'clock headline news. And when Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. In the studio with me this morning, Ms. Teresa Pitkin, Dr. Steve Macfield. We're going to continue with our conversation here. I just would also like to say, I didn't get a chance to say this before, that I believe that those persons from the government who have been on For the Record recently have been treated with respect. We have not ambushed them with any questions. We have had discussions off mic during commercials breaks on things that we didn't necessarily want to raise, on air as well. So I just want to point that out. And anyone out there who feels that we have not been fair to the government, please feel free to call in and tell us that as well. We have one caller on hold. Let's hear from that caller. Good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Good morning again to you.
Morning again, sir.
I think it's important what you're saying, dear Dr. McField, and what you said, Mr. O.C. No, you've all just been very candid and to the point. Wonderful show. What you're saying and showing the difference between, because a lot of people like to compare us to the United States because we have so much close connection there. But you have shown the difference to all the people now, the difference between the system of government. It's very, very different. What I'd like to say is I agree with you. I've often echoed that clarion call for us to have more Caymanian journalists, that things are presented fairly, both in the print and in the audio and video media. We should, and we should have more Caymanians in it. We must be one of the few countries, if I can think of any other, that has more foreign people controlling the journalism and it's damaging. We have seen what that has done when with this apology to this great lady, what can happen. We need to have Caymanians primarily on forefront in our journalism. Thank you very much again. I listen on.
Thank you very much, caller. Thank you very much again, Ms. T.
Right. So when you invited me to participate on the show, we had conversations about it. And one of the things that you made very clear, and you said at the time, T, I would invite you to be candid, professional, and raise the topical issues. It's going to be something that we're going to research and we're going to try, and as part of providing a public service to the Caymanian community, we're going to do the research and try to disseminate information that is measured and, that people have an appetite for. And what we have done also is that, when concerns are raised to us on the streets, we try to bring them in-house to try and have a dialogue and a conversation about it. but we don't. I've never found us to be pro or anti-government, pro or anti-individual. In fact, quite a few times on the show, we've said that we're not in the business of shaming anyone. We're frank, we're candid, but we're also measured. And it's just, we were just talking in the break, and I was saying that, we're a little too thin-skinned. The kind of conversation that we have here can't even compare to what you see on Hard Talk and some of those other TV programs. And what we've been trying to do is to up the ante. And many people, there are very few areas that I visit that people don't pull me aside and say, you guys are doing such a great job. And they say that they take it to work and they listen to it. And many of them don't call in, but when they see you on the street, and that's the other aspect of providing a public service. And obviously this is a program that is owned, Radio Cayman is owned by government, and we would be actually doing a disservice if we actually said things there that were inappropriate or offensive to folks out there. But we speak the truth. And we call it,
truth to power.
Yeah, I was just saying to Steve, I don't know what kind of sorrel or Cersei you were drinking this morning, because you're something else, Mr. OC, as Mr. For the Record, as Steve called you. So we try to bring that brand of research, that professionalism, and some levity, because that's also important. But what people are seeing also is that there is a certain sensitivity on this show to what's going on in the street. And there's a simmering of ill will because people are dissatisfied with many things in the community. And my concern, and again, I raise it consistently, let's not wait until blood is flowing on the street before we listen to what is going on, listen to what people are saying, and respond sensibly to the concerns. One of them is by having a sensible national conversation about what's going on, because Cayman is too small to have two communities. You really got to be on one trajectory that embraces all folks that lives here and call this place their home. That's my view.
Doc?
It doesn't surprise me really. It doesn't surprise me really, because when in the 80s, when the whole cadre of us came back with our degrees and our education, we tried to up the ante, to elevate the country to another level, to have this conversation with the people, and to have people to express their views about what they feel publicly. We didn't have the access to the radio at that time, and we were branded. They told us that they call us communists. They said that we were the educated fools, and that we were going to mash down the country because we were enlightening people to truth. I remember my cousin teacher McField when he was at the University of the West Indies, and it was the era where black was beautiful and everybody was wearing their afros and things like that. And he came home with his afro, and he had his first year economic textbook with him, and he used to have a little column in the newspaper called Savings, teaching people what was compound interest and what was simple interest in the bank and all that sort of stuff. And people got offended about that. And one time when he came home with his first year economic textbook at the airport, it was confiscated from him. His book was confiscated from him. And as a result of that, some of the politicians of the day went on this rampage, and they banned a whole lot of books. You couldn't read a whole lot of books. You couldn't read International Teachers Journal. You couldn't read Malcolm X. You couldn't read Marcus Garvey. You couldn't read all of those things that are so ridiculous today. Some of them are still on the banned book list, by the way. And he was ostracized and put down and thrown aside. And it's the same thing with Roy Borden, same thing with Gilbert McLean, the same thing with Oswald Rankin, the same thing with myself. I remember fighting so much in the courts for bail, to get a bail, because when I came back, bail was at the discretion of the judge. And bail in every civilized criminal system is to ensure the presumption of innocence until when you're found guilty. And I remember the judge turning his back on me in court, turn his chair and show me his back. And I had to go through all of that. And so nothing much has changed. It's just a different era now. And so this radio station, this for the record show, is trying to enlighten the people, as I have been confronted with people all over, as I go in the bank, as I go everywhere, say thank you for the enlightenment, thank you for the education that you've given us about politics and civics and things like that. Thank you for doing that. It's a great show. Keep it up. But some people wanted to have it their way. They do not want to come to publicly have a conversation with the rest of the people. And that is the problem with Cayman politics, and has always been the problem with Cayman politics. I think the best years of Cayman politics, as I see it, was between 72, in the 70s to the 1980s, when you had people like Mr. Benson, and you had people like Jim Borden, and you had people like Mr. Norman Borden, and you had people like the great orator Clifton Hunter, and you had all of those great men who debated for hours and the eloquence and the speeches. When you look at things like the great Benson Ebanks, and you said he who was not a lawyer but could hold his own, I believe, in the House of Lords. And so forth. And now you don't have that caliber of people today. They don't want to have a conversation with you, to ask them anything, or to have an expression from them. And the problem is that they're all thick-skinned, and they do not want to be enlightened, and they don't want to have an enlightened electorate. But as long as I'm on for the record, I am going to be enlightening the electorate, and I am not going to go until they push me out.
Yep. When we return, we're going to talk a little bit about the Caymanian protection law, the immigration law that we have now, and at some future show we want to take you down the road in terms of where we came from, where we're at now as far as immigration is concerned. And believe me, people, it is no accident where we are today. It all had to do with from 1971, 1972 onward, progressively got worse and worse for Caymanians as far as legislation is concerned. Please stay tuned for the record. We'll be back shortly. Good morning. Welcome back to For the Record. One caller on hold, going straight to the phone lines. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Good morning, OC, Dr. Maxfield and Teresa.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning, sir.
I just wanted to run my 2 sentences. Some questions that were asked, whether they were rhetorical or not, is debatable. But there's 2 points there. One I would like to address was we're talking about our Constitution and the makeup of our Legislative Assembly and options and what have you. And oftentimes Bermuda keeps being brought in. Mm-hmm. During my time participating in constitutional talks, maybe I got it all wrong, but it was my understanding that the reason Bermuda has the form of government that they have was because they tricked the UK. They convinced the UK to say that they were going to go independent, therefore they needed some autonomy, but they needed to do it in stages, and then they would go off. Otherwise, there's a great potential of dismal failure. So the UK agreed to it, and when Bermuda got to where they are, it's like, we're quite fine right where we are. Thank you very much. We don't want to take the next step, but the door remains open for them. And we were told that, as I understand it, that categorically there was no way that Cayman would ever be allowed to get, or any other overseas territory would be allowed to have the type of government that Bermuda has. Mm-hmm. Like, they were hoodwinked on that. No, Dr. Maybe you can correct me on that or verify it. The second point that I want to bring up was a question that was asked by one of your listeners about where are the entrepreneurs at Cayman and what's happening to them, and they named out a few well-recognized names. And I think I have an answer to that, and I don't know if I can put it across as succinctly and direct as it could otherwise be, but simply put, we have a lot of industrious, very capable Caymanians out there who are being held to the bottom of the pond by overbearing amount of restrictions and regulation terms and conditions that didn't exist when those pioneers set out to do their thing. And if anybody doubts me, try setting up a business. And just don't even bother trying to find the place. Just get the paperwork done. And I'm not saying that paperwork and that the paperwork that's required and requested isn't needed. The fact of the matter is obviously you have to take it on the whole. We're playing on the global stage, so you got to take into account your know your customer, because of terrorism, money and money laundering and all of those protections and all that paperwork dovetails into all of those regulations and restrictions. Mm-hmm. But the point being is, it is also coupled by the fact that there are an elite few who quietly go about setting up a system for their advantage, because they can. And so we have our own people who have gone away, who are fortunate enough to have the funds provided, or they were even smart enough to go there and get full scholarships and come back with a degree, and then all of a sudden says, all right, now we're going to put in these criteria for anybody else to come along. That you have to have this degree, you have to have this amount of years of experience, and the list goes on and on and on. And so that when we, for example, I'm going to take my industry in the construction or architectural industry, now you're having to have $1 million insurance, which is okay, fine, to an extent, but you also have to have X amount of years of experience. And, you know, how many times do we build an airport, or how many times do we build a hospital, or how many times do we build specific facilities? And it's not that they say, okay, fine, go out and get a subcontractor and work with them. They just give the full contract to a foreign contractor, and we therefore don't even get a piece of the pie. And that's how it's been, and so it's very demoralizing, and it's self-defeating in terms of a community. They don't realize what they're doing is just keeping us stagnant, while those who've come from afar, who've had the exposure, therefore get to reap all the benefits, and we're left holding the bag with nothing in it. Mm-hmm. And so they need to be mindful when, in terms of government in itself, the civil service, the requirements that they put in place for people to hold certain positions now almost invariably always require a university degree. Well, there was a time when the majority didn't have them. If they need to put in a policy in which if the person can demonstrate competency, then it doesn't always have to come with a university degree. Yep. And so that's true. The problem. Okay? That's just my 2 cents there. And Dr. McPhail, if you could confirm or refute that on my understanding on the other part of the LA and...
Yeah, we will certainly address that for you, caller, as well. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. One more caller. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Good morning, Mr. O.C.
Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning, Mr. Risa and Dr. Steve McPhail.
Good morning, ma'am.
As I told Mr. Paul, I'm going to call in to give you all some compliments. I don't ever miss the show unless it is absolutely necessary for me to go somewhere.
Thank you.
You do a wonderful job. Dr. Steve is a walking encyclopedia.
Yes.
And Mr. Risa is not far behind. And Mr. O.C., you seem to know everything. So may God bless all three of you and all your family members. And keep up the good work. You're doing a wonderful job. Thank you very much. God bless.
Thank you very much, Miss Georgia. Thank you very much. And if we didn't do it here, we would find another forum to do it as well. Yes, I just want to put that marker down also. Before you respond to the other caller, looking at the Bermuda Constitution, pre-independence Constitution, and we've heard them talk about that. I've heard legal advisor to the FCO, Mr. Ian Hendry, point that out as well. But we need to look at the particular situation in Bermuda when this constitution was offered to them. Bermuda was ruled by white merchant class, land-owning class.
Yes.
Bear in mind that black people in Bermuda only got the vote in 1968.
That's right.
1968.
Yes.
So I want to bear that in mind.
That's right. And remember, that was also in the context of the civil rights movements in the United States at the time. That is very, very important.
So they would have given Bermuda independence because Bermuda was ruled by rights. They were given their first and second and third cousins independence.
That's right. And the first Bermuda grew out of a one-house legislature in 1820. That's when the
1620.
in 1620. I mean,
Yeah.
1620.
Yeah.
And in 1888, it became a bicameral legislature, upper and lower house. But in all of that time, black people could not vote in Bermuda. The qualification for voting that you had to be white, you had to be from the landed class, and you have to be male. There was no universal suffrage at all.
And in many instances, those persons didn't have one vote; they had more than one vote because of their own property in other parishes. They were able to vote there as well.
Yes,
exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
It was in 1968, because all of the civil rights movement, the discrimination in Bermuda, when people were marching and stuff, that they got a new constitution. And in order to protect the white class, the ruling class, the British government gave them a more advanced constitution to give them full internal self-government so that they could protect themselves from the underclass or the blacks in Bermuda. That is the reasons why the British say they will never do that again. That's what they say. There will never be another Bermuda. If you read through the lines, what they're saying, we're not going to do this again.
Yes.
You're not going to let that happen again.
You may see it happen in the Falklands
Make it see
or
the
places like that because they're what they term they call kith and kin.
But they will never do it to any other Caribbean countries overseas territory again. That's what they mean.
Okay, let's talk. And this is briefly to introduce us to what we're going to be talking about. At least on Wednesday, we're going to look at the progression, and I put that in quote progression because a lot of people consider it a regression rather than a progression in terms of our immigration laws. We want to look at the 1971 bill that became the Caymanian Protection Law, 1971, on the 27th of March, 1972. It came into effect. We want to look at the amendments that came about to that in 1977, the damage that amendment did to children born in the Cayman Islands, even of children born outside of the Cayman Islands of Caymanian parentage. We want to look at the 1984 Caymanian Protection Law and some of the discussions in there about eligible persons, where the huge argument in the committee stage after the second reading of the bill in the Legislative Assembly, talking about eligible persons, where they wanted to insert the fact that a U.S. citizen was an eligible person, but they wanted to put restrictions in there. They removed some Commonwealth countries, only named some. The debate about people from Honduras, people from Cuba, some legislators, fears about communism. I mean, they had this obsession about communism, about people coming from Isle of Pines and living as in a communist country all their lives and what they would bring to Cayman. And when those people just basically wanted to get themselves from under the communist system as well. So we want to look at the 1984. We want to look at the 1992. We want to look at when the change of name from Caymanian Protection Law to Immigration Law, because and I have read to you some of Mr. Benson's contribution when he introduced the Caymanian Protection Law, what he said about it. We're going to go into depth into that because people, we always say, and I'm using this worn out adage, you don't know where you're going if you don't know where you came from. And when it comes to immigration, I am not sure whether or not we're heading in the right direction, because Caymanians feel that they're getting the end of the stick in relation to our immigration laws. Final comments from both of you, closing comments.
Right. So, and I'll leave the last bit for Dr. McField. I remembered when I was home, the Honorable Roy Bawden was then one of the ministers, and he invited me to do some research on immigration. And I looked at a number of communities. But I know at the fore, one of the concerns he had at the time was this idea of social engineering and where we believe persons in Cayman ought to come from and the kind of community we want to have. And, some of the concerns he had with that was, cultural differences and diversity and how we view that and whether or not that was in our very best interest. So that was an issue. The other concern, the other issue that I was going to raise was with respect to leadership. When MLA Kenneth Bryan was here with us the other day, I spoke to him about having a clean slate because he doesn't have a history of being involved politically and in the House. Mm-hmm. And he should be very careful about how he presents himself and the issues that he wants to communicate by way of his vision. Now that we've been doing a lot of the research on the Hansards, we see how people viewed the community, and we then have to ask ourselves, the type of leadership we elected at that time, whether or not the leadership is the type that we ought to have had in the first place when you see some of the issues and how they responded to some of the concerns. And I would dovetail that also to our culture, how we viewed ourselves, because some of the leaders that we have, I know that I would have some difficulties considering them leaders in the broadest sense, in that, they actually put the Caymanian community first. That's in my personal view. But in their view, they may well have been thinking that they are putting Caymanian people first based on their philosophy, their lived experience, and the type of community that they wanted to see evolve. So, and this is one of the reasons why this show is so different. When Steve was speaking just now, for example, about the Bermudan history and the civil rights and the universal suffrage, I actually knew when that began. And I was in a position to say it was 1620. Mm-hmm. Steve knew it was 1620. He made a mistake. Yeah. But that's what this show does. We bring a certain background, a certain level of experience, and a certain level of education. And I'm not being braggadocious when I say that. I'm just saying we're bringing a well-rounded and broad perspective. And we don't always agree. But it's a perspective that we can disseminate in a way to the community that invites them to sit down and think. It's not as if we're up here gossiping or anything. We look at the issues, we dissect the issues.
Because there's a lot to gossip about too, but we don't
do that. And we know people's time is very important, so we respect that time. So when we try to deliver something that is wholesome, that is of some relevance, and not just to quote-unquote the Caymanian community, but to the broader community. For example, I'm always speaking about having a national conversation, because that's the only way, OC, we're going to bridge some of these gaps that we have in our community. And I would wish everyone a fabulous week. And that's my thing for this morning.
Thank you, Ms. T. Doc?
Yeah.
I just would like every listener, if possible, to get a copy of the Cayman Islands Constitutional Order 2009 and read Section 16 of the Bill of Rights and read Section 119 of the Constitution itself, where it says that there shall be advisory district councils. I just want them to abide by the Constitution. I don't ask them for anything else. I'm not asking for any favors or any money or any privilege. I'm just asking to abide by the highest law of the land. And if the politicians or the government or the cabinet or anybody obey the Constitution and put into effect Section 16, what the British government gave us the right to protect ourselves, then this show will not be advocating that we do all of these things that we say are lacking in our society. Please, readers, listeners, get a copy. You can. I think it's online. You can run it down from the internet.
Yes.
The Cayman Islands Constitutional Order 2009. Read Section 16 and read Section 119. And if those two sections are put into force, then I my time on this show has been for something and have not been for naught.
And we asked the government to treat that with the urgency that they have treated every other issue that they have brought to the Legislative Assembly in a hurriedly fashion to ensure that it got done because it had an impact on people's lives. Treat the advisory district councils, the whole issue, and what needs to be done to fine tune it. If the law needs to be repealed and rewritten, then do so, but treat it with urgency, as well. We've seen, I see where some members of the Legislative Assembly are trying to work their way around and at least trying to create something in the meantime that will work. I saw an article in relation to Minister John Seymour in terms of what he's attempting to do. So they're trying to work their way around it, at least get something on the ground that is working until all of the legislative changes or can be made as well. Folks, I want to thank you for allowing Radio Cayman and by extension for the record and our voices into your homes, into your vehicles as you traverse the busy roads of the Cayman Islands, into your places of work, whether it be an office cubicle or if you're working in the outdoors. I also want to remind you that we are our brothers and our sisters' keepers. There is always someone out there who's less fortunate than we are, and I ask you to extend a helping hand to them. If you can't do that, then I suggest donate to a worthy charity, because we always want to consider those who need, not necessarily those who want. I say to you, have a great day. Continue to support your radio station, Radio Cayman. Join Sterling, Dwayne Ebanks at 12 noon for Talk Today. And as usual, we ask the good Lord to bless these three beautiful, wonderful Cayman Islands.
For the Record is brought to you by Fidelity.
Informative, impartial, insightful.
This is your talk show.
1-800-534-8255. Your calls, your input. This is For the Record.